Dear friends, welcome to our channel. We're delighted to share with you different stories about love and betrayal from around the world. So now, let's begin today's story journey. The last rays of the setting sun bathed Garrett's pickup truck, turning the dust on the road to gold. He parked in the familiar driveway of his farm, returning a full 2 days earlier than planned. The agricultural conference had ended early, and he was eager to get back home, back to his land and his wife. The moment he pushed open the front door, Garrett sensed an unusual quietness. Corinne's coat that usually hung by the entrance was missing, and there was no water glass she typically left on the dining table. He called her name several times, but only silence answered. Garrett frowned and walked toward the bedroom, finding the closet door half open with half of Corinne's clothes gone. Her toiletries were missing, and the jewelry box on the dressing table was mostly empty. Just then, his phone vibrated. "I'm going to live with someone more successful." Corinne's text appeared bluntly on the screen. Garrett stared at the message for a long time, his fingers gently brushing across the screen as if trying to understand the meaning behind these words. He walked to his study, opened the safe, and took out a folder containing evidence that a private investigator had collected a few weeks earlier. In the photos, Corinne and Dominic were intimately talking at an upscale restaurant, embracing at a hotel entrance, passionately kissing in Dominic's car. Each photo stung like a knife, but he had foreseen this day coming. He dialed the phone. "Wallace, it's me." "She's gone," Garrett said calmly. "I'll be right over," Wallace answered, with the professional coolness of someone who had handled family affairs for years. 10 years ago, when Garrett first met Corinne at his cousin's wedding, he was drawn to her vitality. As a marketing executive from the big city, Corinne had a romantic yearning for country life, but loved the fast pace and opportunities of the city even more. "You really own all this land?" Corinne had asked in surprise then, gazing at the wheat fields stretching for miles. "This land has nourished my family for 5 generations, Garrett answered proudly. "It's not just my livelihood, but my responsibility and legacy." "Sounds like some kind of heavy burden," Corinne had half joked, but Garrett didn't laugh. He should have noticed that detail then. What was legacy to him might only be a burden to her. They fell in love at a speed that surprised their friends. 6 months later, Corinne quit her city job and moved to Garrett's farm. The wedding was simple but filled with sincere blessings. Back then, no one would have imagined that 10 years later, everything would turn out like this. During the first few years, Corinne truly tried to adapt to rural life. She learned gardening, actively participated in community events, and even began selling homemade jams and honey online. Garrett appreciated her efforts and tried to meet her needs, taking her to nearby towns to enjoy the city atmosphere when he wasn't busy with farm work. But he could see the longing in her eyes, that yearning for the distant city that had never truly disappeared. "You'll never understand, will you?" Corinne suddenly asked one night 3 years ago, after they had returned from dinner at a restaurant in town. "Understand what?" Garrett asked, confused. "What I've given up." Corinne stared directly into the darkness outside. "Here, my talents and dreams are buried. Your roots are in this land, but mine were uprooted long ago, and I can't find a place to plant them again." Garrett tried to explain that he understood her sacrifice, but words seemed never able to bridge the growing gap between them. Corinne began going to the city more frequently, attending what she called women entrepreneurs gatherings. Garrett was busy with farm work, but was never a workaholic. He simply knew the land needed constant care and labor, just like a marriage. Dominic's appearance changed everything. A year ago, this well-dressed businessman came to their small town, representing a large real estate development company planning to build a luxury resort. Garrett remembered their first meeting, in the town hall, where Dominic eloquently spoke about his grand plans, his long fingers moving across the projection screen, sketching the luxurious blueprint for the future. "This will bring hundreds of jobs and tremendous economic growth to the area," Dominic declared at the town meeting, his shining smile and impeccably pressed suit standing out among the local farmers. Garrett immediately received the proposal with caution. "Our ancestors worked hard to cultivate this land, not to turn it into a playground for the wealthy. Once development begins, water pollution, wildlife habitat destruction, and traffic congestion will all become issues." He spoke firmly at the meeting, winning the approval of most farmers. But Garrett noticed Corinne's eyes lit up, and she sat upright. listening attentively to the vision of the future Dominic was describing. After the meeting, she proactively approached Dominic, offering to help improve their community communication strategy. "Your wife has real vision," Dominic later told Garrett, extending his hand. "Instead of opposing each other, why don't we discuss how to make this project beneficial for everyone, especially local farmers like you? You could be the biggest beneficiaries." Garrett shook his hand, but his inner unease grew stronger. He noticed Dominic looking at Corinne with a certain calculation and assessment, as if evaluating a potential piece of land for development. In the following months, Corinne frequently mentioned Dominic in his project, praising how he understood the complexity of modern agricultural economics, implying that Garrett was not advanced enough. She began using terms Garrett had never heard, talking about value maximization and asset liquidity, as if his ancestral farm was just an investment waiting to be monetized. Corinne started going out more frequently, explaining she was helping Dominic with community research. She set a new password on her phone, when they had never kept barriers between them before. Garrett noticed her behavior was changing too. More city fashion clothes, more expensive perfumes, and even her way of speaking adopted Dominic's shrewd businessman tone. Until one rainy night, Garrett returned home early due to an irrigation system failure on the farm and found Corinne's car parked outside a motel they had never visited. He didn't act impulsively, but quietly drove back home and began reconsidering everything that had happened over the past few months. The small changes he had noticed suddenly formed a clear line, pointing to a fact he couldn't ignore: his marriage was falling apart. The next day, Garrett met with Wallace, his family's lawyer and friend for generations. Wallace wasn't just a lawyer but a guardian of this land, knowledgeable about every deed and regulation. His office was filled with old law books and maps, with a window overlooking the fields that Garrett's grandfather had once cultivated. "I think Corinne is having an affair, and probably with that developer," Garrett said directly. Wallace pondered for a moment, his fingers tapping on an old contract on his desk. "Your prenuptial agreement and the family trust give you strong protection. But if you want more concrete evidence, I suggest you proceed with caution. Dominic is not an ordinary person. He has extensive legal resources." Garrett nodded, understanding what Wallace meant. In the following weeks, he noticed that the interaction between Corinne and Dominic was becoming increasingly intimate, while Corinne grew more distant from him. She began checking her phone during dinner, with smiles no longer meant for him. Sometimes she wouldn't come home all night, with the excuse that she was working late at a hotel in the city. Garrett could feel her growing distant, but he chose to wait and observe. He hired a private investigator, Silas, a former veteran of few words who soon obtained conclusive evidence. Corinne and Dominic were not only having an affair, but were also conspiring for Corinne to get part ownership of the farm in the divorce. Can you imagine? In the recording Silas played, Dominic's voice was clearly recognizable. His land, once developed, would be worth at least 10 times more. And as his wife, you're entitled to half. But he would never agree to sell. Corinne's voice sounded both excited and worried. "He doesn't need to agree," Dominic responded confidently. "We have ways to handle such stubbornness. I have connections that can get the land rezoned, and once rezoned, the tax burden will force him to sell." These words cut through Garrett's heart like blades. What pained him more was Corinne's agreement and laughter, as if their 10 years of marriage were just a joke waiting to end. Garrett handed the evidence to Wallace for safekeeping, then waited patiently, focusing on his land and the upcoming harvest season. Each time Corinne mentioned Dominic and future development, he simply nodded, pretending to know nothing. This pretense exhausted him, but he needed time to prepare his counterattack. Now, standing in the half-empty bedroom, Garrett felt a strange calmness. Corinne's betrayal was now a fact, his suspicions confirmed. He didn't try to win her back, didn't confront her, didn't burst into anger. None of that could repair the already broken trust. Instead, he called Silas to confirm if there were any new developments in the investigation of Dominic and began executing the plan Wallace had prepared for him long ago. 2 days later, Corinne's calls flooded his phone. Garrett didn't answer any of them. Only Wallace knew that he was sitting on the back porch of the farm, watching the setting sun bathe the land he had protected all his life, contemplating the road ahead. The land doesn't betray, doesn't leave, doesn't lie. That was the only certainty he had now. Corinne stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of the hotel suite, gazing at the skyline of the unfamiliar city. Since leaving the farm 2 days ago, her excitement and sense of liberation had gradually been replaced by unease. At first, living with Dominic in the penthouse suite felt as if the 10 years she had spent away from city life had never existed. Dinners at fancy restaurants, champagne, expensive gifts. Dominic knew how to make a woman feel special. But now, that atmosphere of happiness was beginning to dissipate. Dominic was always in meetings or taking calls, with hardly any time for her. His assistants and colleagues looked at her with judgment and disdain, as if she were just one of Dominic's many projects. Most importantly, the shared future they talked about seemed to always remain in the phase of beautiful promises, never concrete plans. What troubled her most was that in her hasty departure, she had barely taken anything besides some clothes and personal items. Her important documents, jewelry, family photos, even her cherished collections, all remained at the farm. "I need to go back to get some things," Corinne told Dominic, who was working on his laptop. She noticed his frown, his eyes not even leaving the screen. "Now?" Dominic asked without looking up, his fingers incessantly tapping the keyboard. "Can't you call your friends to help you get them?" "I don't have friends there I can ask for help." Corinne smiled bitterly, suddenly aware of this cruel truth. For 10 years, she had complained about farm life, yet never truly integrated into the local community or built her own support network. "Besides, it's not that simple. There are documents and valuables I need to handle personally." Dominic finally looked up, a flash of impatience in his eyes. "Fine, but be quick. I have an important investor call tonight, and I need you there to support me. Investors like to see that projects have community support, and you, as a local, can provide that endorsement." Corinne felt a sting. Dominic had never really cared about her, only valued the convenience she could provide for his project. During her 10 years on the farm, Garrett had never spoken to her in that tone. Even in the busiest harvest season, he had always respected her needs and feelings. "I'm not a local, Dominic," Corinne retorted. "I've always been an outsider, just happened to be married to a farmer." Dominic waved his hand dismissively, indicating that such a distinction was unimportant. "Whatever, it's precisely because you married an influential local farmer that your opinion has value." He glanced at his watch. "You'd better go now and try to be back by 3. The investors will call at 4. When Corinne returned to the farm, she was surprised to find that the gate code had been changed. This detail made her realize that Garrett's reaction had been quicker and more decisive than she had anticipated. She rang the doorbell, and, after what seemed like an eternity, Garrett opened the door. He looked haggard but composed, somewhat different from the image she remembered. His eyes, those blue eyes that had once been full of love, were now as cold as ice. Corinne felt uncomfortable but forced herself to stand straight, trying to maintain her dignity. "I just came to get my things," Corinne said, trying to stay calm. Garrett nodded and stepped aside to let her enter what was once their shared home. But she immediately noticed that Wallace was also there, sitting at the dining table with a pile of documents in front of him. This scene gave her a sense of premeditation, as if they had been waiting for this moment. "Hello, Corinne," Wallace greeted professionally, his voice steady and calm. "Before you collect your personal effects, we need to clarify some legal matters." "What legal matters?" Corinne asked cautiously, suddenly feeling an ominous premonition. "According to the prenuptial agreement you signed with Garrett, and the terms of the family trust, the farm and all its assets are strictly protected," Wallace calmly explained, opening a document. "I know these legal terms may seem complicated, but the essence is simple. This land and everything attached to it belongs to Garrett, regardless of marital status." "I know the farm is his," Corinne replied. "But we've been married for 10 years. Legally, there should be common property." "I'm afraid that's not the case." Wallace handed her a document. "This is the agreement you signed before marriage, specifically excluding the family farm and its attached assets from common marital property. We've prepared a list that enumerates the personal items you can take." Corinne took the list in shock, discovering it only included her clothing, some jewelry, and personal items. "This can't be. We've been married for 10 years. I'm entitled to more." She directed her gaze toward Garrett, searching for any possible compassion or compromise. "For 10 years I've supported you, helping to care for this home." "Support." Garrett finally spoke, his voice low but clear. Is that so? And what about your plans with Dominic? Using our marriage to obtain ownership rights to the land. Corinne's face instantly paled. What plans? What are you talking about? Garrett didn't answer directly, but took a USB drive from his pocket and placed it on the table. All the evidence is here. Your dates, your conversations, your conspiracies. Each photo, each recording clearly proves your intentions. You've been spying on me? Corinne's voice trembled with shock. I've protected my family's legacy, Garrett corrected. You have your secrets. I have my preparations. Corinne felt dizzy. She never imagined Garrett would respond to her betrayal so calmly and so well prepared. She had imagined scenes of hysterical arguments, angry accusations, and finally compromises and concessions. After all, Garrett had always been a gentleman. But the Garrett before her seemed like a stranger, a man she had never truly known. It wasn't like that, Corinne defended, but even she heard the emptiness of the lie. The truth was that, as the recordings showed, she had participated in Dominic's plans, seduced by the future he had described. Please collect your things and leave, Garrett said, his voice calm but firm. All legal communication will go through Wallace. I won't prevent you from taking what belongs to you, but only the items on the list. Corinne walked mechanically to the bedroom and began gathering the items on the list. As she passed through the living room, she noticed the places where their photos once hung were now empty. Her heart sank, realizing that Garrett had already begun erasing all traces of her in this home. Most shocking was that this complete severance wasn't from a momentary impulse, but a well-thought-out decision. During the process of collecting her belongings, she tried to regain some control. Dominic has a powerful legal team. They won't let you treat me like this. Perhaps you should ask Dominic how busy his legal team is now, Garrett responded, with a coldness rarely seen in him. The Environmental Protection Agency has suddenly taken an interest in his project. It seems someone provided information about the environmental impact of his previous projects. A coincidence, don't you think? Corinne's hand stopped in midair. She knew Garrett wasn't bluffing. Though quiet, he was never weak. He knew every inch of this land and knew how to protect it. For the first time, she realized she might have severely underestimated his determination and capability. Upon returning to the hotel, Corinne found Dominic heatedly talking on the phone, his expression grim. His suit jacket was carelessly thrown on the sofa, his tie loosened, and his hair not as impeccable as usual. When he saw her, he briefly raised his hand indicating for her to wait and continued his conversation. No, this is absolutely unacceptable. We've already invested a substantial amount of money in preliminary planning. The environmental assessment report is clear. There are no issues. Obviously, someone is sabotaging us. He was practically shouting into the phone, completely different from his elegant public image. Corinne silently observed this scene, feeling a sense of strangeness. It was the first time she had seen this out-of-control side of Dominic, seeing the irritability and anxiety hidden beneath that polished appearance. He hung up the phone and looked at her with a coldness he had never shown before. What happened? Corinne asked. The Environmental Protection Agency has started investigating our project, Dominic said through gritted teeth, violently throwing his phone onto the table. Someone anonymously reported that our development would damage the local wetland ecosystem and water sources. Not only that, someone also leaked information about our company's problematic projects in other states to the local media. Corinne felt a chill. Garrett's knowledge of the local environment was deeper than anyone's, and if he decided to attack Dominic's project, he would know exactly where to start. And Wallace's contacts and influence could ensure this information reached the right people. Did you get what you needed? Dominic suddenly asked, his tone harsh. No, Garrett was prepared, Corinne admitted. He knows about us, and he has evidence. Dominic's face darkened further. What evidence? Photos, recordings, enough evidence to harm me in the divorce case, Corinne said, feeling ashamed. Damn it. Dominic abruptly stood up and began pacing around the room. This explains everything. Your husband is obviously retaliating against us. He stopped and looked directly at Corinne. Do you know what this means? Without your plot of land, the entire project loses its central value. Without the guarantee of that land, investors might withdraw their funds. That's not my land, Dominic, Corinne said bitterly. It never was. It's the legacy of Garrett's family, protected by a trust. So you're useless to me? Dominic said cruelly, a question that pierced Corinne's heart like a knife. In the days that followed, Dominic's project faced more and more obstacles. Local newspapers began reporting on how his projects in other regions had caused environmental problems and community disputes. The county council postponed approval of the project. The most decisive blow came when several key investors withdrew their funds due to the negative news. Each day, Dominic became more distant. He began not returning to the hotel for entire nights, ignoring her calls and texts. When he finally appeared, he smelled of alcohol and perfume, with a cold and tired look in his eyes. Corinne tried to support him, offer advice, but his responses became increasingly caustic, as if she were just another source of his troubles. One evening a week later, Corinne met one of Dominic's colleagues at the hotel bar. This female project manager had obviously been drinking quite a bit and had a vague understanding of Corinne's identity. "So you're his latest local contact?" she asked drunkenly. "I don't understand what you mean," Corinne replied. "Oh, please, he has one in every project," the woman scoffed. "Finds a useful local person, tricks her into helping the project proceed smoothly. Sometimes it's the mayor's daughter, sometimes a local official's wife, this time a farmer's wife. The pattern is always the same. Promises of a beautiful future together, and then he disappears without a trace once the project is complete." Corinne felt nauseated. "Are you saying I'm not the first?" "Darling, you're not even the first this month," the woman said contemptuously, then walked away. That night, when Dominic returned to the hotel, Corinne confronted him directly. "This isn't what we agreed on. You promised we would start a new life together. But now I find out I'm just one of your many local contacts." Dominic laughed coldly. "Are you really that naive? Business is business, Corinne. We needed you to understand the local situation, to know how to approach those stubborn farmers, especially your husband. But look at this mess now. If it weren't for your stubborn husband and his farmer friends, I would have succeeded already. So you just used me to get to Garrett and his land?" Corinne's voice trembled with shock. "Don't be so dramatic. We used each other," Dominic sneered. "You wanted to escape farm life, wanted to return to the city, wanted to enjoy the life you think you deserve. I gave you that opportunity. Don't act like you're an innocent victim." These words hurt Corinne because they contained a certain truth. She really did want to leave the farm, wanted to return to her familiar urban life. But at that moment, she realized the terrible mistake she had made, trading a genuine feeling for an illusory promise. A week later, Corinne received a letter from the divorce lawyer. According to the terms of the prenuptial agreement and family trust, she had very few rights to any property of the farm. The most she could get were the few savings accumulated during the marriage and her personal effects. "I should have more rights. This isn't fair," Corinne protested to the lawyer she had hired. "I'm afraid the agreement is very clear," the lawyer said regretfully. "Worse, we have evidence of your infidelity and property conspiracy. If you go to court, you could face worse consequences, even possible charges of conspiracy to commit fraud." Just as Corinne was trying to contact Garrett to discuss a possible settlement, she returned to her hotel room and discovered all of Dominic's belongings had disappeared. The front desk informed her that he had already settled the bill and left. The hotel bill was left to her, his phone was disconnected, and his office was empty. Only a cold note on the pillow. The plan failed. Good luck. Desperate, Corinne began frantically calling Garrett, but all calls went to voicemail. She sent countless text messages, but received no response. She even drove to the farm, but security refused to let her in. This new security guard, a military veteran, politely but firmly informed her that if she tried to enter without authorization again, she would face trespassing charges. Corinne felt the world collapsing beneath her feet. She had lost her husband, her home, and all sense of security, and the man who had promised her a better future had abandoned her in an instant. The most ironic thing was that she now truly understood Garrett's deep love and responsibility for the land. When you have something of true value, you protect it at all costs. Meanwhile, Garrett's life was being rebuilt. The Environmental Protection Agency's investigation led to the permanent cancellation of Dominic's project. Local media reported on Dominic's company's record of misconduct in other areas, including violations of environmental regulations and improper financial operations. With community support, Garrett launched an initiative to protect farmland, which was unanimously approved by the county council. The divorce was quickly finalized, with Corinne receiving only the minimum division of property. With nowhere to go, she was forced to return to the city, renting a small apartment and starting to look for work. But 10 years of professional vacancy and damage to her credit history made her job search exceptionally difficult. Former city friends showed limited sympathy for her situation, and soon she found herself isolated and helpless. The cruelest thing was realizing that the urban life she had longed for wasn't as wonderful as she remembered. The high cost of living left her struggling to make ends meet. The familiar corners of the city had changed, and her old friends had followed different life paths. She belonged neither to the farm nor to the city, becoming a wanderer between two worlds. 6 months later, Corinne found a job at a coffee shop, with a salary barely enough to cover her basic living expenses. Occasionally, she would see news of Garrett on social media. His farm had received organic certification. He had helped the town establish a farmer's market. He had hosted a conference on sustainable agriculture. He looked good, even better than when she left, as if a burden had been lifted from him. One day, she saw a photo on social media, Garrett standing in front of his farm, surrounded by neighbors and friends who supported him. The caption of the photo was, "Defending our land, protecting our traditions." Garrett's expression was serene and firm, his eyes shining with a love for the land that had never changed. In that moment, Corinne fully understood that what she had lost wasn't just material security, but the love and trust of a man who respected traditions and valued commitments. And all of this had vanished forever because of her betrayal and pursuit of illusory success. At a business conference in the city, Corinne accidentally encountered Dominic's former partner. This middle-aged man recognized her, with a flash of surprise and curiosity in his eyes. "Are you doing all right?" he asked cautiously. "Getting by," Corinne replied briefly, then couldn't help asking, "Do you know where Dominic is now?" "You still don't know?" the partner said, surprised. "He's been indicted in 3 states. Multiple charges of fraud and environmental violations. They say he might face prison time." After the complete collapse of the project, investors began investigating and discovered a series of issues. "It seems your husband's opposition was just the tip of the iceberg." This news didn't give Corinne the satisfaction she had expected. Instead, she felt a profound emptiness. She had betrayed real happiness for an illusory future, and now she had lost both. A year later, Corinne found a more stable job on the outskirts of the city, managing a small garden center. This job reminded her of the garden she had tended on the farm, one of the few things she truly enjoyed about rural life. With time, she began rebuilding her life, but the regret and loss deep in her heart never completely dissipated. One day, she received a formal letter from Wallace, informing her that Garrett had decided to sell some items of common property that belonged to her, including jewelry and artwork she couldn't take when she left. The letter included a list and appraisal, as well as a bank account number for receiving payment. These items might mean nothing to Garrett, but for Corinne, they carried memories and emotions. It was a cold, legal, and ruthless ending, with no room for sentiments. Months later, while driving near the farm, Corinne couldn't help but stop. From a distance, she saw Garrett working with several men, building a new barn. The fields were golden, harvest season was approaching. This land, like the man who protected it, remained unbreakable, constantly renewing itself. She picked up her phone and dialed that familiar number, not expecting much. Surprisingly, the call was answered, but it was Wallace's voice. "Corinne." Wallace's voice was calm and professional, just as it had always been. "Garrett doesn't want to speak with you. He has moved on. I suggest you do the same." Corinne was speechless. This brief response made it clear that her chapter in Garrett's life had definitely ended, with no possibility of a new beginning. She took one last look at the land that had nourished Garrett's family for 5 generations, started her car, and drove away. In the rearview mirror, the farm gradually grew smaller until it disappeared over the horizon. Meanwhile, Garrett stood under the frame of the new barn, watching the car slowly driving away. He recognized it was Corinne's car, but felt no impulse to waver or chase after her. Over the past year, he had rebuilt his life, repairing the pain caused by betrayal. He had let go of anger and resentment toward Corinne, but once trust is broken, it can never be fully repaired. The land doesn't lie, doesn't betray, doesn't leave. This was the most important lesson Garrett had learned from his ancestors. And now, looking at that ceaselessly living land, he knew he had made the right choice, protecting what truly deserved protection. 2 years later, the local newspaper reported on the outcome of Dominic's case. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison and ordered to pay a substantial fine. Meanwhile, Garrett's organic farm thrived, becoming a model for the region. And Corinne, living quietly in a corner of the city, sometimes thought about that land and the man she had betrayed, but those memories were like a distant landscape, clear but unreachable. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more exciting content. We look forward to seeing you in our next story.